my name is Christine, and welcome to my podcast, Unmuzzled at 67. And here is the beginning of Series 3 of the podcast. So you're very welcome, as always. It's great to have your company. And what I usually do is have a little recap of the previous podcast. So the last podcast was, in fact, the end of Series 8. So what I did was I did a bit of a review of Series 2 about, the different podcasts within that series. And I also took a moment to say a big thank you to all of the wonderful followers, or tribe, as I like to say. I just don't like that word, that follow me. And in particular, the ones who take the time to message me. That was and is truly fabulous and absolutely unexpected. Some of the followers or tribe have actually made me look at the podcast in a different way. I had quite preconceived ideas of what the podcast would be in terms of who it would appeal to and who might possibly follow me. But having interacted with some men who follow me, they are saying to me that they think this podcast and the subjects are genderless, and the story is as timeless and relevant today as it was when I was living these stories, which would be 60s, 70s and 80s. In fact, some aspects of that belong in the mental health category, obviously, are very relevant today. And a lot of those I'm going to talk about in this particular series. So if you're sitting comfortably, then I'll begin. There is so much to share with you in this series, which really lifts the lid on what was going on with me inside my head, from a young teenager to very recently. By the time I was 60, I was physically exhausted from the hard physical job that I'd had for more than 30 years, and mentally too. My life had been lived with virtually no control over my emotions, and also the stress of my job had taken its toll. Let me describe myself to you. I overreacted to most situations. They didn't need to be major, and made everything into a drama with me at the heart. Yes, it really was all about me. I reacted to life and decision making in particular without thinking anything through. I never paused. I never said, let me think about that for a moment. I just automatically responded. And of course, I usually made the wrong decision. I had a lifetime of making the wrong decisions. But I seemed mentally programmed to be like this. I had knee-jerk reactions to life. I had no filter, and very often said the wrong things to the wrong people in the wrong manner, and often caused offence, and very often was found apologising for my behaviour. I was always butting in on people's conversations. I couldn't wait for them to finish their sentence. And this, I can imagine, was a very annoying habit for others, I'm sure. And to be honest, I can still be like that today. I have to absolutely keep my eye on that. And as well as all this, I was an overthinker. Now, I consider this to be the most dangerous trait of all. Let me tell you about my recent example of overthinking, where I almost lost my job. This was a conversation with my boss. I was extremely stressed about something that had happened at work. Stress is the trigger for me. That is what I need to watch. So, even now I can't remember. It's not that long ago. It's maybe a year, not that much more. I hate to say, but it was. And I I wound myself up for about 20 minutes. I'm saying, I'll fucking tell him. And you know what else? I'm going to tell him that. And see when he says this, I'll say that. And see when he says that, I will fucking say this. Right, I'm ready for him. So, it's a bit like preparing for some kind of, emotional war. So picked up the phone wrongly. I was quite aggressive as well in my tone. And I was going on and on and on to him about... this job is just absolutely getting to me. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do this job. I mean, it's even affecting my mental health. I mean, what am I meant to do now? And I went on, and he said, he just waited till I finished. And he said very quietly, "Did you say your mental health, Christine?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, if that's the case, maybe you're right. I mean, maybe reluctantly, we do need to part company. I mean, I don't want to be the kind of employer that is responsible for creating a mental health problem. Maybe we should part company, Christine. I mean, if that is really how you feel, so for fuck's sake, that's not what I expected him to say, was it? That's not the scenario that I had made up in my head when I was making up all these ridiculous situations. It wasn't that. So thankfully I was able to think on my feet a wee bit and remind him about a time that he had overreacted to something and compared the two. So I was able to talk myself back into my job, and I was able to save the situation. But what if I hadn't? What if I hadn't been able to save the situation? What I was saying was quite serious stuff. I was more or less accusing him and his company of driving the company in such a way that it was creating mental health issues for me. That's a really serious thing to say these days to your boss. I had talked myself out of a job. And I did that with overthinking. So, I was extremely lucky and relieved, for fuck's sake. I mean, if I had lost that job. But this is how dangerous overthinking can be, and how important it is to get it under control. Even if you think you can't, you can. It is possible. So as well as all this, I had no self-esteem and no self-worth. If you've managed to listen or look at any of the early podcasts from Series 1, you'll remember the different scenarios and situations that I had gone through when I was quite young and never really felt I never really felt loved or never really felt... always was made to feel that I was a nuisance and I brought shame on the family, all that kind of thing. So I had no self-esteem and I was super sensitive. I took offence at anything. Now, here's an example of that as well. So one day I'm working in this very posh hotel and we're walking down a long staff corridor. It's quite early in the morning. It's just me coming from this direction and my boss coming from the other direction, and he's on his phone. He's not on his phone, he's looking at his phone. And it's just the two of us because it's so early. And so I was waiting for him to say good morning. He didn't say good morning. He didn't even lift his head. He was so engrossed in his phone. So as soon as I walked past, I said, "Oh, that's it. He's fucking going to sack me. He never said hello to me. I've done something wrong. Oh, for fuck's sake. I bet he phones me. I bet you I need to go to his office." So, that's the kind of stuff that my head was full of. It was like a permanent train crash inside my head. It was the old outside confidence 10, inside confidence 0. What I portrayed to the outside world was a confident, self-assured, ballsy woman. But actually, inside, the real me was the total opposite. The aftermath of any of these behaviours is a pure head roaster, whether it's happening in your personal life or whether it's happening in work. And sometimes in work, it's possibly even worse. Having to face up to and take responsibility for the consequences of any of those behaviours could drive you mad with guilt. My life was like Groundhog Day. Same mistakes, day after day, year after year. No matter how I tried, I could not control any of these behaviours. I drew so many lines in the sand, saying to myself, for fuck's sake, Christine, this has got to stop. It's getting out of control. I cried myself to sleep, dealing with yet another aftermath of this crazy, unpredictable behaviour. I just didn't know what to do. I couldn't understand myself. So where did all these behaviours come from? When did it all start? For me, we need to go back to episode 1 of series 1. And I believe the root of all of this was the overheard conversation when I was 12. Immediate changes took place in me after that happened. When I heard what my dad said, it felt like a spear was aimed at my heart from a distance and was thrown and penetrated my heart with such a force that I felt the physical impact. My whole world shattered in that moment. The person I adored, my dad, broke my heart into pieces. Remember, I was a young girl who went to Sunday school every week, sang in the church choir, attended the girls' brigade at the church every week. I was overweight, struggling with these early boobs growing, which my mum either never saw or didn't know how to talk about. But in any event, it was never talked about. I was struggling with taking my periods at 11 years old, still at primary school, when most girls were 15 and 16 years old. And there was no one to talk to about these worries that for me at the time were huge. I was self-conscious, was very shy, and I just did what I was told. And I was a very good student at school. But after that overheard conversation, I changed totally. To being rebellious, selling drugs with my then boyfriend when I was still at secondary school, selling the drugs in Sucky Hall Street, and all the other scenarios that you'll remember in those early episodes in Series 1. What I came to realise after doing some research and reading lots of books is that if you have no self-esteem or self-worth, putting yourself in possibly dangerous or risky situations means nothing, as you have no value to yourself. And if the person you love the most, my dad, also sees no value to you, or that you're not coming up to his expectations, or that's what I thought, risks mean nothing. What does it all matter if it all goes tits up? Nobody cared enough, or so I thought. Nobody saw me. I felt less than invisible. So I also didn't care. But please remember, at the end of the day, I'm just a pensioner. I'm not a counsellor. I'm not a therapist. I'm just telling you my story, and I'm not giving advice. On the contrary, we're all different. I'm just offering my life experiences. My belief and experience is most of the behaviour traits that I have mentioned tend not to be taken very seriously. And in fact, they're often dismissed, like, she's a fucking rocket, man. She's a bam. Or she's an overthinker, when you've got your eyes rolled up to the ceiling. Minimising or just not understanding the real effects that one or any of these behaviours can have on your life. It can be like pressing a self-destruct button on a daily basis. And now that I don't really behave like that these days, well, not so much, still have to keep my eye on it, I see even more clearly the real harm and damage that is caused. I was always reading books, doing research on my worrying behaviour traits that had caused me grief my whole life. I needed answers. What was fucking wrong with me? Why couldn't I control my emotions? I was permanently in fight or flight mode. How could I get this under control? A true light bulb moment came watching Joe Rogan. He did an incredible video, which you can still see now, on emotional resilience. And the research I did completely backed up what he said. This was a game changer. It was me. He was talking about me. Did he know me? I didn't know Joe Rogan knew me, but clearly he did because he dedicated that whole video. I just saw me in every single example that he gave there. I was not able to deal with the ups and downs of life. I had no emotional resilience for sure. I want to read to you just now some information that I read quite recently, in fact, preparing for this, describing emotional wellness, just to see, how you yourself resonate with this. Emotionally well people have the ability to successfully handle life's stresses and adapt to change and difficult times. Emotional healthy individuals tend to have strong and healthy coping skills that help them in trying and testing circumstances. What do you think? I was the opposite. I had none of those abilities. Okay, so now what? What am I meant to do? Now I can see what the problem is. How can I make changes? That was how I had been as far back as I could remember. And I can remember especially when I stopped drinking in my 20s. The booze had numbed me. So when I stopped, there I was, stuck with the real me. So here I was, stuck with a mindset I'd had for 40 years. But then I started to think back. I think this might be episode 2 of series 1. That if you've listened or watched, you might remember. When at 16 years old, I went to see a psychiatrist as an outpatient because I had tried unsuccessfully to commit suicide. That appointment was memorable for all the wrong reasons. It was horrible and frightening and had a lasting impact on me. But during that appointment, I was asked a lot of questions, but so was my mum. She was outraged, naturally, and kept saying, "It's not me you should be questioning, it's her," pointing to me. But the psychiatrist disagreed, and he continued to question her, much to her indignation. His conclusion was that she had treated me like an infant, doing everything for me, and had not allowed me to develop my own skills of independence, decision-making, and taking responsibility. Do you remember in series 1 how my mum used to apply for jobs for me? I mean, that's the kind of mum that she was. My mum's response to any issue as I was growing up was, "Leave that to me. I'll sort that." And so that's how I saw issues being solved growing up. I can see, of course, that she thought she was doing the right thing and that it was done with love. But in the end, I didn't know how to deal with life's ups and downs, especially the downs, as those were taken away from me, magically removed by my mum. And I'm certainly not levelling any blame at her. She was the kindest, most empathetic woman you could ever meet. And she just didn't want me to have to deal with some of the really challenging things that she had had to deal with as a young girl. But this is where it all began. And how do we fix it? Change your mindset. That's what research told me. But can it be done? What does it mean? The answer is yes, it can be done. But just as you commit to changing your physical body, You need to do the same with your mind. No pain, no gain. If you're unhappy with your thinking and your behaviour, change it. Don't accept it. At least that's what I told myself. I was not prepared to get into my old age still acting like a bam and a child, leaving carnage behind me and constantly apologising for my behaviour. So join me next week when I will share with you what I did to change my mindset and to retrain my thinking. Thanks as always for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to have your company, and I look forward to seeing you next week.